Hello, everyone. My name is Clayton Davis. I'm the Film Awards editor at Variety. Thank you very much for joining me today with Sam Pollard, the director of MLK FBI, that just premiered as the opening night film of Hamptons Doc Fest. How you doing, Sam? Thank you for joining.
My pleasure. How you doing today, Clayton?
It's 7 months into a pandemic, but we're good, right? Like that's
Good.
the good part.
Good.
I've been starting every Q&A I've had this year. I think we have to start here. How are you? How are
I'm
you
good,
doing?
hanging in, dealing with the pandemic like all of us. Trying to do my business primarily remotely, but it seems to be working out. Sometimes a little tiring sitting in this chair at my computer all day, but
Yeah.
it's okay.
We have to see if they can lend us some helicopters to bring us to like nice little remote locations we can hang
Exactly.
out and stand up a little bit.
Yeah.
So congratulations on the film. I am so taken by it, as many people are. Just really great work
Thank you.
that you've done here, important work. And I think a good place to start is with how did you get this film? How did it end up into your hands?
In 20 to over 2.5 years ago, around sometime in 2017, the producer of the film, Ben Hadeen, reached out to me and said he had read a book written by David Garrow, who had won a Pulitzer, called Bearing the Cross, about the SCLC and Dr. King. And he had written this other book called about MLK and how J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI had been surveilling Dr. King in the 60s. And he thought it would be a good next film for us to do. So I got a copy of the book. I read it. I immediately called him back after I finished the read, and I said, Ben, you're absolutely correct. This is a film. This is our next film. So we started that journey. We reached out to David Garrow, optioned the book. Then we went to Pittsburgh, where David lives. We had a camera crew lined up, and we spent 4 hours interviewing David about the contents of that book, which is basically a lot of the stuff you hear in the film that he's talking about. How the surveillance of King started in the 60s, how it was initially because they thought he was connected to the Communist Party. And then when they learned that he was not a monogamous man, they recorded all these relationships that he was involved with. And the idea was to discredit and destroy King because they were so concerned that he was going to upend America, the America that we grew up with, which was segregated, and racist. And they were concerned that here comes this black messiah, as J. Edgar Hoover called him, that he was going to destroy the fabric of American democracy. And so it took us on this very fascinating journey where we learned about, that King wasn't a knight without some chinks in his armor, and that J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI did some despicable things.
Do you feel as though, especially in the context of today, where the Black Lives Matter movement has been very prominent in media headlines, and there's a active campaign to discredit the core value of what it's bringing? It's bringing about equality and bringing to light the ugliness that blacks and browns go through every day in America. Do you feel like that playbook still is continues to live on, and we see a good amount of it right now in your film?
What's really sad, Clayton, is that much of what we see in this film still exists today. I mean, the notion that you can have someone out there saying things today like, the suburbs of white America are going to be destroyed by black and brown people. It's the same kind of rhetoric we heard in the 60s. The idea that, back in the 60s when they were trying to taint Dr. King with the Communist Party, now we have people saying the Black Lives Matters people are being tainted by Antifa. It's the same kind of dog whistles that we're hearing. And it saddens me to see that this is this really complicated thing about America. In some ways, there's been tremendous change, as you and I both know. But in some ways, the notion of systemic racism is alive and well in America. It's alive and well. I mean, I was saying to someone, when we got a guy in the presidency who's trying to paint Joe Biden as a leftist, as a communist, it's like, what? Wasn't that the same kind of language that we were hearing in the 60s? It's
Yeah.
amazing how America doesn't get off of this sort of same kind of rhetoric. It's so sad.
Do you think, and you obviously you get access to a lot of things in this film. How much more do you think there is out there that you didn't get access to?
Well, what's not there is what you'll hear in 2027 are the actual audio tapes. So what'll be interesting is hear what's actually on those tapes, to hear Dr. King and whoever else are in those rooms with Dr. King and what they're talking about. And I contend that even though there may be what some people consider salacious stuff, there'll be stuff about strategies and agendas that the civil rights movement was undoing during that time in places like Birmingham, in places like Little Rock, places like Selma, that'll be eye-opening. Because and I know that King, sure, he may not have been monogamous, but he was in some of these hotel rooms with people like Clarence Jones and Andy Young and James Bevel, Dorothy Height, and they were talking about the movement, about strategies to break down the walls of segregation. So it's going to be very revealing to hear some of these things, in my opinion.
I've had a prediction. I want to know if you share it. And listen, like, we've seen an assault on many things that are been considered progress in today's modern era. I have this terrible suspicion that in 2027, when those audio tapes come to light, that will birth something that will call for the end of MLK Day in January. That will be the next thing to grab onto and say, you guys wanted to take down our monuments of leaders that made all these mistakes back in the day. Well, your guy isn't perfect either. Do you kind of share that sentiment, or share that kind of disdain of look of where we're headed?
Listen, and I know there will be a group of people that will say exactly that, and my attitude is bring it on. Bring it on. If I can still walk at that stage of my life, I'll be out in the streets protesting, because the pros and cons of living in a democracy, as you know, is everybody can voice an opinion. You don't always have to agree with it, but everybody can voice opinions. So there will be people out there who say, you wanted to take down Robert E. Lee, you wanted to take down Jefferson Davis monuments. Let's take down King's monuments. Let's take his name off the streets. There'll be people out there, but I don't think it'll be to the same extent that we've heard in these past 6 months, in my opinion.
Yeah, good. All right. I want to get some kind of hope for the next 7 years, because we don't know.
Hey, man, it's a thin thread, brother. It's a thin thread.
Oh, we're going to get there, promise. All right.
Yesterday, wait a second, Clay, yesterday, Amy Coney Barrett got sworn in, right?
Yep.
God knows what will happen next week after the election. Excuse me, I won't use that word. Yeah. If Trump feels like, and this, he's got the shaft. He's gonna turn to that Supreme Court, and the question will be, if it comes to that, what will those 9 judges, particularly the 6 now who are on the right, will they do the right thing? Go ahead.
Hopefully it's such a blowout we don't even have to.
Well, that's what I hope too.
That's what we're hoping. But let me talk a little bit about your career. I think it's important here. I'll just give you some context. I'm pretty well versed in the documentary space. I always say I'd never watch enough docs, though. I discovered you at a film festival in Florida with your last film, Sammy Davis Jr., I've Got to Be Me, which not enough people have seen. Then that opened the Sam Pollard book to me, and then I was able to start looking through some of your other films, even most recently Mr. Soul this year. Can you talk a little bit about, especially as a person of color in this space, and one of my big advocacies here at Variety is about education and access for people of color to get into the industry, not just as an actor, but to know that they can be the next Sam Pollard, a documentary filmmaker, or a cinematographer like Bradford Young. What got you into a director's chair that you were like, documentaries, that's the stories I want to tell?
Well, what got me in director's chair was I've been an editor for so long. I wanted to stop editing. I wanted to direct,
Yeah.
and like a lot of, editors who make documentaries with ego, I said to myself, well, I can do it better than some of these documentary directors,
Yeah.
which when you actually get out there in the field, you realize, oh boy, you've sure put your foot in your mouth.
Yeah.
Because it's not so easy to direct, either fiction or documentaries. So, I initially had wanted to be a fiction film editor. That was my initial goal because I grew up watching all these old movies, old Hollywood movies. So when I got into the business, I wanted to edit fiction films. But then I was very fortunate to be mentored by an editor who edited documentaries a lot. And he introduced me to the world of documentaries and the fact that as a documentary editor, I became like a surrogate director. So I didn't, back then I was kind of shy and quiet. I didn't want to be out there talking to people. So this was a way for me to direct in the edit, but then after being an editor for like 12, 15 years, I realized that I was no longer too shy. I wanted to get out there and vocalize my own opinions, have my own vision, express myself verbally, artistically, creatively, cinematically. So I wanted to direct. So that's what I did.
I just got shout you out some of your big editing efforts: Mo Better Blues, Jungle Fever. My personal favorite, it's mine because I grew up in the '90s. Juice is always going to be my jam. And I'll tell anyone to watch Juice any day of the week.
Everybody loves Juice.
Yeah, but more prominently, Clockers and Bamboozled also. So you made your stamp.
The thing that I always say about editing documentaries and feature films, editing those feature films for Spike was in some, extremely invigorating and inspiring because, as you know, man, Spike has vision, man.
Yeah.
And just sitting in the editing room and sometimes being on the set with him, this guy he's like an old-fashioned general, man. He knows how to move the troops. He knows how to come with very creative stuff. And in some ways, that inspired and influenced how I thought about shooting and editing and directing my own films when I went back to do documentaries. So I think that those, 8 films that I did for Spike, man, was richly inspiring for me as a creative person.
Yeah, I have to say, I've been here at Variety for 2 months. My first story in print was the New York issue, the cover of Spike Lee this year.
Good,
it was like my first out the gate with Spike Lee. I was so excited, and it's great to see people like you and him that have just really paved the way for so many.
He's one of the great film directors, man. Yeah. He's one of the great all-time film directors.
Yep. But so about that next generation now. So, which brings me to my next question to you. As we get further and further away from MLK, and I say away from the time that he lived, I remember, and this is my generation speaking a lot about, like, back in the civil rights movement, if I was there, I would have got up and I would have fought, right? Yeah, I would have been doing something, right? And then we've been telling people
2020.
And I've been telling people, like, what you're doing right now is exactly what you would have been doing in the 60s. And listen, I'm not gonna say I'm sitting here on a pedestal and say like I'm any better. I speak up, but I don't go out to everything like I'm supposed to. I know it's a big fight out there. But what do you want the next generation to get from your film as we get further away from MLK, like from his time here? He's becoming such like this figure of, not many people that were alive when he was alive can speak to what it was like when he was around as that generation goes. What do you want this next generation to get?
I would like this next generation to understand he was very complicated like all of us. And even though he was one of the most important historical figures in not only American history, but in world history, you should be able to look at him as a human being who had his flaws. I think the other thing that would be important for this generation, the next generation to look at when they watch this film, is that go back and study the history. Study the history of America in the 50s and 60s, and look at it on the many different layers that it is. And don't accept America as one way. When I was growing up, I thought of America in my teens as this was the American melting pot, that we could all come together and all get along. Now, well, I learned differently.
Yeah.
So I think it's important for people to understand the complexity of American history, the complexity of world history, and the complexity of the human beings who were at the forefront of many of these things that happened during those historical times.
Yeah. I think I always have to ask this because I always feel like you have to ask a director this. There's got to be the director's cut of version of this film, the one that you really wanted to put out there. How long is that one? What got left out that you didn't want to? Everything's in there.
I never suffer with that, man.
Yeah, really.
My ego is not one that says, "Well, if you see my director's cut, it'll be 10 times better."
Yeah.
I don't suffer with that, and you know why I don't suffer with that, Clayton? Because I'm an editor.
Yeah.
And my job always was to make the best film that we put out there for people to see.
Yeah.
I don't have this notion that, well, I'm going to go back and I'm going to put back the scenes that I missed and stuff. I don't miss anything, man.
I always ask everyone, I was like, what version of Blade Runner have you seen in your lifetime?
Yeah,
I was like, no one knows which one it is.
I saw the one with Harrison Ford's narration.
Really?
The first time I saw it, and I loved it. So examples like everybody's always now talking about the restoration of Touch of Evil without the music at the beginning. That Universal put on it from Hank Mancini. Now, for me, Clayton, that's the version I like the best.
Yeah.
Sure, Orson Welles had all these notes about he didn't want any music for this and all that. I don't care. I mean, I've seen it. It doesn't matter to me. The version that Universal, in Orson Welles' opinion, mangled is the one I grew up with. I love that version.
Awesome. So, last question for you as we wrap this up. What's next? What's next in the doc? What's that burning project that's inside that Sam is going to unleash on the world soon?
I have a rough cut of a film that I co-directed about Max Roach, the wonderful jazz musician and composer and activist. That's been my passion film for like over 20 years. Finally got it to a rough cut in the last year and a half. And we're trying to get someone to take it on and show it and screen it so we can finish it up. That's my passion.
Somebody watching right now, maybe?
I hope so.
Yeah.
I hope it's going from your ears from your mouth to their ears.
All right.
And then I'm always developing some new stuff, working out some new ideas. But I love the process of making movies. Sometimes, in all honesty, Clayton, the process is more interesting than the finished film. Because the process of filmmaking I equivocate with like life. There's ups and downs, and sometimes you end up happy, sometimes you end up sad, and that's the life, man.
Any narrative features brewing underneath?
I personally think that I'm at this stage of my life where I used to dream of directing a narrative feature. I don't think I dream that anymore. I think if I could help a young director direct a narrative feature, help produce a narrative feature, that would be the goal.
Cool. Because I'm the Film Awards editor here, I have an eye on the Oscars all year long.
Good.
And gut check, I think we should be paying attention to this film as we continue along the front. That would be just from me to God's ears, but I think you have.
No, it's from you to all those Academy members' ears
It trickles down though; it goes up and down. So I'll put it up, and then he'll send it down, and then we'll all do the work. So everyone that's watching, tell everyone to see it. I've been saying that during this time of the pandemic, we have to mature our cinematic palettes, and not enough docs get watched, and this is one that would be great to introduce some people to. But thank you very much for taking this time with me today. My pleasure,
Clayton.
Yep, and then for everyone else, enjoy the rest of the films at Hamptons Doc Fest.
Thank you very much. Be good.